Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're doing something, well, a little ambitious.
Just a little.
Okay, very ambitious. We're going to sit down, maybe grab a coffee, and try to really, truly get our heads around one of the most imposing books in all of philosophy. Arthur Schopenhauer's masterwork, Die Welt aus Willenvorstellung.
It really is an Everest of a book, but what's so fascinating is how Schopenhauer himself saw it. Our sources show he insisted this huge volume, The World as Will and Representation, contains only ein einziger Gedanke, a single thought.
Just one thought.
One single thought. And he says the sheer length was necessary because there was, simply no shorter way to unpack it all.
I just love that level of confidence. It's almost a warning to the reader, isn't it? Imagine writing something this dense and then telling people, look, I know this is long, but trust me, it's just one idea, and oh, by the way, I am fundamentally completing philosophy right now.
He even quotes Pliny in the preface, asking something like, how many things are judged impossible before they're actually done? He genuinely believed he'd found the intellectual gold that philosophy had been chasing for centuries.
That immense self-regard seems to be the fuel for his entire project. He wasn't really looking to join the conversation.
No, not at all. He was there to issue the final decree. He saw himself as this solitary genius, just showing up to correct centuries of error. But, and this is key, he didn't want just any reader. He set these incredibly high barriers to entry.
Okay, yeah. Let's unpack this required reading list he lays out. It feels like he's filtering his audience before they even open the book.
Oh, absolutely. He outlines 3 prerequisites if you want any hope of truly understanding him. The first one is totally non-negotiable. You have to read his earlier book, Über die vierfache Wurzel des Satzes vom zureichenden Grunde.
Which translates to, On the Fourfold Root of the Principle of Sufficient Reason. That title alone sounds like serious homework.
It is the foundational homework. Schopenhauer calls it the necessary propedeutic, the preliminary study. This book basically establishes that everything has to have a reason, but that the word reason or ground actually means 4 different things.
Okay, so what are the 4?
There's physical causality, cause and effect. Then there's logical ground, like premises supporting a conclusion. Third is mathematical ground, relationships in space and time. And finally, there's motivation, the cause of human action.
And his point is that these are all distinct.
Totally distinct. And without getting that straight, he claims any real understanding of the main work is, and this is a quote, not possible at all. He just assumes you know it.
Wow. That's a huge intellectual lift just to warm up. So you have to accept this whole new structure for why things are before you can even ask what things are. What's the second demand?
The second is, well, even bigger, a thorough, deep familiarity with the philosophy of Immanuel Kant. He says this is straightforwardly presupposed.
Of course it is.
For Schopenhauer, Kant is the great turning point. Before Kant, philosophy was stuck in what he called naive realism. This idea that the world we see is exactly how it is, independent of our minds. Kant's Copernican revolution showed that we only know the world as phenomenon, as appearance or representation.
But never as the noumenon.
Exactly, the thing in itself. We can't access it directly. So if you haven't really grappled with that, if you haven't internalized Kant's big move,
You're not ready for Schopenhauer.
you're not just unready, you're, in his words, in a state of innocence. He calls it a childish realism. You are fundamentally incapable of philosophy. You're still in the nursery if you think a tree falling in the forest makes a sound when no one's there to hear it.
State of innocence is just such a beautifully scathing dismissal. Okay, so what's the third one? Because this is where he really goes global, right? He moves beyond Europe.
This is the final, highest preparation. He says if you spent time with the divine Plato, you're better prepared because Plato gets you thinking about eternal ideas. But the reader who is best prepared of all is the one who has received the blessing, the Vulvat of the Vedas, through the Upanishads.
The Upanishads. The core texts of Hindu philosophy.
Right.
Why are they so critical for understanding this German idealist?
Because Schopenhauer saw in them the deepest confirmation of his own thought. He predicted that the influence of Sanskrit literature would be as profound for his century as the revival of Greek culture was for the Renaissance.
That's a bold claim.
It is. He argues that the core insight of the Upanishads, that Atman, the individual self, is identical to Brahman, the ultimate reality, is the very same truth he's arriving at through Western philosophy. He even claims that every single saying in the Upanishads could be derived as a consequence of his book's single thought.
So his strategy is basically use Kant to understand the limits of what we can know, the world is representation, then use the Upanishads to get a glimpse of the essence of what is the ultimate identity.
And his book is the grand synthesis that explains it all rationally. It is the ultimate philosophical flex. And this self-belief leads directly into his spectacular takedowns of his contemporaries.
Yeah, let's talk about his targets. He was not subtle. This is the era of German idealism, especially Hegel.
Oh, Hegel was his favorite punching bag. Hegel's philosophy was, state-sponsored, celebrated everywhere. Schopenhauer just dismisses him completely, calling him a spiritual Caliban.
A spiritual Caliban from Shakespeare's The Tempest. So he's saying Hegel's philosophy is crude, monstrous, enslaved to power.
Precisely. And he didn't stop there. He called Hegel's entire system Vindbeutelei und Charlatanerei.
Which is
humbug, hot air, and charlatanism. Just nonsense. He accused the whole generation of professors of prostituting their intellect for government jobs.
And what was the establishment's reaction to this declaration of war?
Silence. He claims they knew his work was heterogeneous, indeed dangerous, and they chose the smartest strategy to just ignore him completely. He sarcastically praises their sagacity for realizing the threat he posed. That silence was, for him, the ultimate proof that he was right.
So we set the stage, the required reading is done, the enemies are identified. Now we can finally open the book. Let's dive into Book 1, which is the first half of that single thought. The world as representation, or Die Welt als Vorstellung.
This is where it all begins, and he starts with the most direct statement possible. The very first line of the book is the core axiom. The world is my representation. This is it, the fundamental rule. No object without a subject.
So everything, the stars, this table, the ground beneath our feet, it all exists only in relation to a mind that is perceiving it. It's all Vorstellung.
Exactly. And it's critical to understand that this perception isn't just passive. He calls it intellectual intuition, or Anschauung. The intellect, the Verstand, isn't for abstract reasoning. Its job is immediate and singular, to transform sensation into an objective external world.
Okay, walk me through that. Sounds like we're skipping the conscious thinking part of perception.
We are. For Schopenhauer, all perception is basically knowledge of cause from effect, and it happens instantly. The starting point is always your body. It's the immediate object. When light hits your eye, you don't first experience light out there. You feel a change in your body, a raw sensation.
And the intellect just processes that instantly.
In a single stroke, the intellect relates that sensation, which is the effect, to an external cause. And it projects that cause out into space and time as an object. His analogy is brilliant. As with the entry of the sun, the visible world stands forth, so the understanding transforms the dull, meaningless sensation into intuition. It's automatic, necessary.
So my body isn't just another object in the world. It's the very condition for the world's existence as an object for me. It's the anchor.
It's the ultimate bridge. And this is how he tackles that classic philosophical problem. If the world is just my representation, how do I know life isn't just a dream?
Kant's answer was about coherence, right? That real life follows the law of causality, but dreams are chaotic.
Right, and Schopenhauer just swaps that away. He says, no, wait a minute. Everything in a dream also follows the principle of sufficient reason. Dream logic is still logic. If you dream you're flying, the dream provides a reason for it within its own context. So causality alone can't be the test.
So what is the test then?
For him, it's not some neat, logical criterion. It's the deep, undeniable, continuous coherence of our experience over a lifetime, all anchored back to the certainty of our own body.
Okay, so this whole idealistic framework allows him to just dismantle two major philosophical positions. Let's start with materialism.
The materialist just assumes that matter, time, and space exist absolutely, before any mind. Schopenhauer says materialism bears death in its heart from the get-go because it violates the prime directive. No object without a subject.
You can't even think about matter without first using the concepts of time, space, and causality.
Which are all functions of the subject's intellect. So you're using the tools of representation to argue against the need for representation. It's a logical contradiction.
It's trying to eat itself.
Exactly. And on the other side, he goes after the extreme idealists, like Fichte, who tried to generate the entire world just from the subject, from the pure ego. Schopenhauer kind of respects the attempt, but says it was just a sham philosophy, a failure, because it ignores the powerful, structured reality that the intellect presents to us.
So we've established the world as appearance, all filtered through the subject. But humans do more than just perceive, we think. That brings us to Section 3, the tools of reason, Vernunft, and abstract cognition.
Right. We've met the intellect, or Verstand, which handles immediate intuition. Now we meet reason, or Vernunft now. For him, reason is the power that humans have and animals don't. and its entire job is to deal with concepts, or Begriff.
And how are concepts fundamentally different from the intuitive representations we see?
They're a totally different class of representation. A concept is abstract, it's fixed. You can't see or touch a concept, you can only think it. And its power is that it lets us summarize millions of individual perceptions into one communicable piece of knowledge. This is the basis of language.
This is his telegraph analogy, right?
Yes, exactly. He says language is a very perfect telegraph that uses arbitrary signs, which are words. And what it transmits are these abstract concepts. He says if we had to picture every single dog every time we heard the word dog, he asks, what a tumult would be in our head. Concepts save us from that cognitive overload.
So the moment we go from that specific chair over there to the abstract idea of chair, we unlock planning, science, architecture.
Everything complex. The bare intellect, the Verstand, is stuck in the now. It only gets the immediate case. But concepts, held in reason, allow for long-term planning. You can't build a cathedral or perform surgery just on intuition. You need abstract blueprints.
And he uses that building analogy to explain how concepts are structured, the ground floor versus the upper floors.
Right. The concreta are the concepts on the ground floor. They're directly connected to the intuitive world. You can point to a man, a stone, a horse. The upper floors are the abstracta, concepts like relationship, virtue, beginning.
You can't point to virtue.
Exactly. You have to define it using other concepts, which are themselves built on other concepts, until you finally get back down to the ground floor of intuition. He also visualizes them as spheres, kind of like Venn diagrams. The concept horse is a little circle inside the bigger circle animal, but flower and red just overlap.
And that overlap is where rhetoric and manipulation come in.
That's the key. Sophistry is all about manipulating these conceptual spheres. Take a word like passion. It overlaps with the sphere of greatest force, but also with unreason or weakness. A speaker can choose to place it under whichever larger sphere serves their purpose.
This is what leads to his pretty scathing critique of formal logic. He doesn't seem to think it's very useful.
He thinks it's almost totally useless for practical life. He argues that logic is just the abstract knowledge of what every sane person already knows in concreto. You don't need to study syllogisms to know when an argument sounds fishy.
His analogy is that you don't need to study physiology to digest your food.
Exactly. It just happens. For him, logic is only interesting as a specialized philosophical study of how reason itself is structured, not as a self-help guide to thinking correctly.
Okay, let's wrap this section up with his distinction between abstract knowledge, Wissen, and this other thing he calls feeling, or Gefühl. This one is tricky.
It is, because he defines it negatively. Wissen is abstract knowledge, fixed in concepts. Gefühl, or feeling, is everything else. It's everything in your consciousness that is not an abstract concept.
Wait, everything. So physical pain, looking at a beautiful painting, having a religious experience.
Yeah.
Those are all just feeling.
Yes. The only thing they have in common is that you can't reduce them to an abstract, communicable concept. They are immediate. The sphere of Gefühl is huge and varied, but it's all defined by what it isn't. It isn't discursive thought.
But that negative definition actually explains something really interesting. Why we can sometimes feel that something is true before we can prove it.
That's the insight. You can look at a geometric theorem, draw the shape, and just see that it's true. You have the Gefühl, the feeling of certainty, based on your direct intuition of space. Formulating the long logical proof to demonstrate it as Wissen comes much later. The intuition is faster.
And that reliance on intuition is the very stick he uses to beat Kant. So let's move to section 4, the critique of Kant.
Schopenhauer totally respected Kant as the one who made his own work possible, but he thought he made some huge errors. The first one is in mathematics. He just hated the way Euclidean geometry worked, how it would throw away its own best evidence, the direct intuitive evidence, the Anschauung, and replace it with these long, tedious logical proofs.
He said it was like someone cutting off their legs to walk on crutches.
It's a fantastic analogy. Why would you abandon the immediate certainty of what you can see in pure intuition just to build this rickety structure of logical deductions? He thought it was a huge mistake, born from a rationalist fear of trusting our senses, even our a priori intuition of space.
Okay, so that's a critique of method.
Yeah.
But his attack on Kant's categories is an attack on the whole system's architecture.
Oh, absolutely. Kant came up with his 12 categories like causality, unity, reality, by deriving them from the forms of judgment in logic. Schopenhauer just saw this as a desperate obsession with symmetry. He's forcing reality into this neat little 4x3 grid just because it looks nice.
He thought some of the categories were just redundant.
Completely, like unity, plurality, and totality. He's like, these are basically the same idea. Kant was just padding it out to make it symmetrical. But the really big error, the cardinal sin for Schopenhauer,
Was the unjustified insertion.
yes, the insertion of the object of representation as this weird middleman between the representation in our head and the actual thing in itself. Schopenhauer says, look, the object is the representation. By adding this extra step, Kant then had to invent the whole complex machinery of the categories to explain how we build this object. Schopenhauer just scraps the whole thing.
So for him, the categories are useless for perception. They only come into play after the fact, when we start to think abstractly about what we've already perceived.
Exactly. And to prove it, he points to the idea of substance, that matter is permanent. Kant derives this from one of his logical categories. Schopenhauer says that's just nonsense done for the sake of symmetry. We know matter persists because of our direct a priori intuition of time and space. It's a self-evident truth, not some conclusion from a logical formula.
So he strips Kant's system down to its core. There's the representation, the world of appearance, and there's the thing in itself, the mysterious unknown, which of course leads us right to Book 2, where he finally gives that unknown a name.
This is the big reveal. The world as will, die Welt als will. This is the breakthrough. This is the heart of his single thought. If the world we see is just the surface, just representation, how do we ever get a clue about what's underneath? We need an anchor, something we know in a different way. And he finds it not by looking out at the world, but by looking inward. The key is, my body is my will.
That's the key to the innermost essence of the whole of nature.
Yeah.
How does realizing my body is my will solve this huge philosophical mystery?
Because your body is the one object in the universe that you know in two ways at once. From the outside, it's just an object, a representation like any other. But from the inside, you know it immediately. Every action, from me lifting my hand right now to a deep feeling of hunger, is known directly as an act of will.
So the physical movement and the act of willing it aren't two separate things. They're not cause and effect.
They are one and the same event, viewed from two different sides. The body is simply the objectivity of the will. It's the will made visible.
So if my body, which is a part of the phenomenal world, is the visible expression of my inner will, then that will must be the thing in itself of me.
Precisely. And this is where he makes that crucial distinction between the will and a motive. A motive, a reason, a thought determines when and where and how my will acts. But it doesn't create the will itself. The will is the underlying constant striving. It lies outside the chain of cause and effect.
So my character, my essential will, is fixed. But how it expresses itself changes based on the situation.
Exactly. And once he's established that for himself, that his body is will, he makes the giant leap. He extends this to everything, all of nature.
This is where it gets really wild. What he calls will in me. What is that in a rock?
It's the same thing. He says the force that makes a plant grow towards the sun, the force that makes a crystal form its shape, the pull of a magnet, even universal gravity, Schwer, all of these are just different appearances of the exact same inner essence. They are the blind, striving, relentless will, just manifesting at a lower unconscious level.
So when I drop this pen, the force pulling it to the floor is, metaphysically, the same force that drives me to want to live or to fall in love.
Yeah.
It's just will at a lower volume.
That is the revolutionary idea. He takes Spinoza's famous thought experiment. A flying stone, if it were conscious, would think it flies of its own free will. And Schopenhauer says, the stone would be right. Gravity for the stone is what motive is for the human. It's just a groundless, blind craving to be.
Okay, but if the will is this one single universal force, why are there billions of individual things? Why isn't the universe just one giant blob of striving energy?
Because of the principle of individuation, the principium individuationis, the will itself, as the thing in itself, is one. It's outside of time and space. It's indivisible.
But to appear to us, it has to enter the world of representation.
And the forms of representation are time and space. Time and space are the principium individuationis. They are the prism that shatters the single white light of the will into the rainbow of countless individuals. Without time and space, there's no you and me. There is only the one will. All the variety we see are just different degrees of objectification, from the faintest glimmer in gravity up to the bright sunlight of human consciousness.
So the entire universe is one being, experiencing itself as billions of separate competing parts, all because of the illusion of time and space.
That's the core realization. And this immediately leads to a very grim conclusion. If the will is singular, but it's objectified into all these competing individuals, then it's fundamentally at war with itself. It means conflict and strife, Streit and Kampf, are built into the fabric of reality.
Which brings us to section 6. The struggle of the will and the dawn of cognition. The real is boundless, but matter, space, and time are finite, so they have to fight over them.
It's a war of all against all, an inner contradiction of the will made visible. Every grade of its objectification battles the others for resources. Matter is in constant flux because chemical forces are fighting mechanical forces, which are fighting organic forces.
What are some of his examples of this?
The natural world is full of them. He talks about the giant vine in Australia slowly strangling a mighty oak tree. Even in the inorganic world, you can see crystals forming and physically blocking each other's growth. This conflict is nature. He quotes Empedocles. If conflict were not inherent in things, all things would be one.
So the universe isn't some harmonious design. It's a constant self-devouring war. And at some point, this war gets so complex that it needs a new weapon.
Exactly. Brains. In the plant kingdom, the will is blind. It's driven by simple stimuli, rays. The plant just waits for the sun. But for an animal, that's not enough. It has to hunt for food, escape predators. It needs directed movement.
It needs a guidance system.
And that's cognition. The intellect, and later reason, arises as a necessary mechanism, a mécanique. It is a tool evolved for one purpose and one purpose only, to serve the will's desire to preserve the individual and the species. The brain is basically a parasite the body grew to help it find food and avoid being eaten.
So the very thing we prize most, our intelligence, is just an elaborate tool created by a blind, irrational force.
It's a highly specialized weapon, and human reason, Vernunft, gives us a huge advantage over the animals.
This is the blueprint analogy.
Right. The animal is like a sailor who just sees the waves right in front of the boat. The human, with reason, is like the captain who has a chart and a compass. Reason gives us this geometrical, colorless, abstract, reduced blueprint of life. It allows for planning.
And this abstract viewpoint creates what he calls the double life of a human being.
Yes. We live one life in concreto, in the moment, suffering and striving, just like any animal. But we also live a second life in abstracto, the life of calm reflection, where we can see the whole game from a detached perspective. This allows for what he calls composure, Gelassenheit.
And that composure lets us override our animal instincts.
It does. It's how a person can calmly walk into a duel, or undergo a terrifying surgery, or even carry out a long-planned suicide. Reason takes command. We act based on abstract concepts like honor, duty, or future peace. Even when it violates every immediate survival instinct, our animal nature is screaming at us.
So the will develops this tool, cognition. But that tool eventually becomes so powerful that it allows us to see the will itself and maybe find an escape. Let's pivot to section 7. Book 3, The World as Idea in the Realm of Art.
Right. The will is a constant striving, and striving is suffering. But there is a temporary way out, the aesthetic experience. And to get this, we have to introduce the Platonic idea, the ID. Schopenhauer borrows this from Plato, and for him, the ideas are the eternal, unchangeable forms of things, the species, the archetypes, the fundamental forces of nature.
How is the idea different from the concept we talked about earlier?
This is a really crucial distinction for him. The concept, the Begriff, is unitas post remore. It's a unity you create after the fact by abstracting from lots of individuals. He calls it a dead container, totally useless for art. The idea, on the other hand, is unitas ante rem, unity that exists before the individual things. It's the living, eternal archetype.
So a concept is a tool for organizing the world, but the idea is a glimpse of reality itself.
Exactly. The individual person, stuck in time and space, is like Plato's prisoner watching the shadows on the cave wall. The eternal ideas are the true reality outside the cave.
And the way we get out of the cave, at least for a moment, is through aesthetic contemplation.
This is the moment of grace. It happens when you become so absorbed in looking at something, a landscape, a statue, a tree, that you completely forget yourself. You forget your own will, your desires, your needs. You stop being a subject who wants things, and you become a pure subject, a clear mirror of the object reigns subject, klarer Spiegel des Objekts.
You stop asking, what can this do for me? And you just see it for what it is.
And in that will-less moment, what you're seeing is not the individual thing anymore, but the eternal idea it represents. You are temporarily free from the prison of your own will, and that freedom is the source of all aesthetic pleasure.
And the ability to do this consistently, to live in this state, is his definition of genius, geniality.
The genius is someone who has a huge surplus of intellectual power, way more than they need just to survive. This allows them to detach their intellect from the service of their will and just become this pure mirror of the world's ideas. He says the ordinary person's mind is a lantern, just lighting their own path. The genius's mind is the sun, illuminating the whole world.
Which also explains why the genius is often, a bit hopeless at practical everyday life.
Totally. The genius is so focused on the eternal idea that they're clumsy when dealing with individual things and people. They can seem naive or even a bit mad. He quotes Aristotle. Nullum magnum ingenium sine mixtura dementi fut. No great genius has ever existed without a touch of madness.
Okay, so art is the communication of these ideas. How does he break down beauty and the sublime?
Beauty, or schön, is just how clearly the idea shines through in an object. Everything is beautiful to some degree because the will appears in it. But the highest beauty is found in the highest and clearest objectification of the will. Human beauty. The human form is the most complex and revealing expression of the will's idea.
And the sublime, or Haben, adds an element of threat.
Exactly. The feeling of the sublime happens when you're contemplating something that is actively hostile or overwhelming to your individual will. A violent storm at sea, a vast, empty desert, the sheer scale of the night sky. Your personal individual will feels threatened, anxious. But your intellect rises above that fear, and you feel a sense of triumph in being able to contemplate the idea purely, even in the face of your own insignificance.
And this leads to his famous hierarchy of art, which ranks the arts based on which ideas they express.
He starts at the bottom with architecture. Architecture expresses the lowest ideas of the will: gravity, rigidity, cohesion. The beauty of a great building for him is in how it makes that struggle visible. You see the arch and the pillar actively fighting gravity, making its force clear to the intuition.
And we move up from there to painting and sculpture, which deal with the highest idea, the idea of man.
Right. And for him, what matters is the inner significance, not the outer. A simple portrait that reveals a profound truth about human character is a greater art than a massive historical painting of a battle that tells you nothing about the eternal idea of humanity. Art cares about the type, not the token.
Then there's poetry, which puts the idea of man into action.
Poetry shows us the idea of man unfolding over time through actions and emotions. And he argues that great poetry is actually more true than history. The historian is stuck with messy, incomplete facts. The great poet has the idea of humanity itself as their model, so they can depict human nature with a kind of perfect, a priori truthfulness.
And at the very top, in a class all by itself, is music.
Music is completely different from all the other arts. It doesn't copy the ideas, which are themselves the objectification of the will. No, music bypasses the ideas entirely. It is a direct copy of the will itself.
How could it be a copy of the thing in itself?
Because it expresses pure feeling, detached from any specific cause or object. A sad piece of music isn't about this person's sadness for this reason. It expresses sadness itself in abstracto. The melody, with its striving and falling, is a perfect analog for the striving of the individual will. And the deep bass harmony is like the constant, unchanging backdrop of inorganic nature. That's why music feels so profound. We feel like we're hearing the story of the universe itself.
That's a powerful idea. Art is a temporary escape. But the fundamental problem remains. Life is driven by the will, and the will is suffering.
That takes us to the final act, Section 8. Book 4, The Affirmation and Denial of the Will to Life, Ethics.
Yes, Book 4 begins with that brutal pessimistic foundation. All willing, wollen, comes from need, from lack, and is therefore suffering leiden. To want something is to admit you don't have it, which is a state of pain.
And he just demolishes the idea of positive happiness. Completely. Satisfaction is always negative. It's just the end of a pain. And as soon as one desire is fulfilled, one of two things happens. Either a new desire immediately takes its place, or you're left with lanwile, a dreadful empty boredom, which is its own kind of suffering.
It's an exhausting cycle. We're trapped.
We are. He uses those famous myths. We're on the revolving wheel of Ixion, we're the Danaids trying to fill a sieve with water, we're Tantalus, forever thirsty. Lasting happiness is a metaphysical impossibility because the will is a boundless craving.
So if everyone is just this bundle of selfish striving, how does he even begin to build a system of morality? How does he define right and wrong?
Morality only arises because of the conflict between these individual wills. For him, the primary concept is wrong or unrect. Wrong happens when one individual affirms their own will so aggressively that it becomes the negation of the will appearing in another person's body.
And the most extreme example of that is cannibalism.
Yes. Cannibalism is the clearest possible picture of the will's inner contradiction. My absolute affirmation of my life requires the absolute negation of yours. Right, or rect, is just the negation of that wrong. It's the boundary line.
He also has a very simple basis for property rights, doesn't he?
Very simple. It's based solely on labor. The work you put into something is an extension of the will objectified in your body. To steal the fruits of that labor is to negate the other person's will. It's much more direct than theories based on first possession or social contracts.
Okay, so the default state is selfish conflict. Where does genuine goodness, true ethical action come from?
It comes from one place and one place only, compassion or Mitleid. And he directs this right at Kant, who thought pity was just a weakness. Schopenhauer makes the incredible claim that all pure love, agape, caritas, is compassion, Mitleid.
So all true love is actually pity.
In his sense, yes. What motivates a truly good act is not some abstract duty, but the immediate, intuitive recognition of another's suffering, which you understand because you know your own.
It's the ability to see that their pain is essentially the same as my pain.
It's the moment you see through the principium individuationis, the illusion of separation. The compassionate person pierces the veil of Maya and realizes that on the level of the thing in itself, the tormentor and the tormented are one and the same. The singular will is inflicting the suffering on itself. That recognition of eternal justice is the only source of real morality.
That's a huge insight. But even that doesn't stop the wheel from turning. It just makes you feel bad about it. This has to lead to the final step, the negation of the will to life.
Section 9, the negation of the will to life and the end of the world. So, life as we know it is the Will zum Leben, the will to life. The default mode is affirmation. We affirm the will through constant desire and through the sexual impulse. We ensure the will continues beyond our individual lives.
So if life is suffering, why isn't suicide the answer? Isn't that the ultimate denial?
He's incredibly clear on this. Suicide is not a denial of the will. It's a powerful affirmation of it. The person who commits suicide isn't rejecting life. They're violently rejecting the conditions of the life they've been given. They want to live, but they are enraged that life isn't meeting their demands.
So what is true denial?
True denial is ascesis. Self-denial, the mortification of the will. It's the systematic starvation of all desire until wanting itself ceases.
How does that happen?
It happens when the intellect, the tool the will created, finally turns its full light back on the will itself. This knowledge of the will's futile, painful nature acts as a quietive, a tranquilizer, a soother for all wanting. The drive just dies down.
And what becomes of the person who achieves this, the saint?
The saint is someone whose will is permanently quieted. They remain as a pure cognitive being, just a clear, untroubled mirror of the world. For them, all the world's dramas, its passions and fears, are like chess pieces after the game is over, or masks that have been taken off in the morning. They're free.
And he sees this path reflected in the world's great religions.
Absolutely. He sees an essential agreement between the core of Christian ethics, chastity, poverty, self-denial, and the wisdom of India, especially the Buddhist goal of nirvana. He interprets original sin as the affirmation of the will, and redemption as its negation. For him, the mystics and ascetics of all traditions discovered the same practical truth.
Which brings us to the final, mind-bending paradox. If the will is negated, its reflection, the world of representation, must also vanish. What is left?
This is the paradox of the twofold nothingness, or nix. For us who are still full of will, when we look at that state of complete desirelessness, we see a terrifying empty void, nothing. We shrink from it because our entire being is the will to have something.
But the perspective is reversed for the saint.
Completely. For the one in whom the will has turned and denied itself, for them, this our so very real world with all its suns and galaxies is nothingness. All the striving, the pain, the conflict, that is the illusion that vanishes, leaving only a silent, profound peace. The nothingness we fear is their ultimate reality.
That is a staggering place to end. We've gone from the world as a mental picture to its essence as blind striving, found a brief holiday in art, and ended with a path to total release through self-denial. We've really traversed the world from representation to will.
We have. And I think the core inversion he forces on you is this. You have to stop seeing yourself as a thinking mind that happens to have desires and realize that you are a blind, striving will that just happened to develop a mind as a tool, a sophisticated machine, to better serve its own insatiable, painful nature.
And that brings us right back to that single thought, connecting everything from the highest human emotion to the simplest law of physics. Let's just consider that again, gravity. If Schopenhauer is right, the force that pulls a stone to the earth is, in its innermost essence, the exact same blind, groundless craving that defines human passion, ambition, love, and hate.
It means that every time you see a crystal form, or two chemicals react, or a planet orbit a star, you are witnessing the same metaphysical entity that drives your greatest triumphs and your deepest sorrows, just on a different stage. The will is everywhere, forever at war with itself, creating this endlessly tragic and endlessly fascinating universe. And once you see that, you realize that for Schopenhauer, the world isn't a puzzle to be solved, it's a tragedy to be escaped.
An essential tragic thought, presented with brutal clarity. Thank you for guiding us through this necessary deep dive.